I'm a big fan of the small foils and big wings club. Basically, I just like going fast and using really efficient foils. I want to talk you through this logic and hopefully convert you to trying out smaller foils. Let's break this down from getting on foil, staying on foil, getting through your maneuvers, and then chat about the pros and cons of being in the small foil, big wing club versus being in the big foil, small wing club. In terms of getting on foil, a lot of people think that your small foils are for when it's really windy, but I personally love using small foils as light wind as possible because they are so much fun and so efficient, and they're pretty wild to use when the water's dead flat as much as they are when the waves are up and the bumps are firing. So to get on foil with a small foil, you have the option of getting more power through a bigger wing or getting more efficient at your pumping technique. And then there's obviously going out when it's windy. As I mentioned, the last one's a given. You'll be able to use a small foil when it's windy, full stop, so that's fine. But let's touch on what wings to use and technique. In terms of what wings to use for small foils, to give you a bit of a baseline, I've been playing around with the Skate 550, the Eagle X 600, use the F1 Momentum 516. I'm about to play with the Eagle X 500 as well, which should be a lot of fun. And I pretty much always use either a 6 meter or a 5.5 meter. And because I've really worked on my pumping technique, I can get these going in days that are gusting 12 knots, as low as 5 knots of breeze staying on foil, but yeah, around that gusting 12 knot range. I used to have a 7 meter CWC, and yeah, I was in the 8 knot, gusting 8 knot sort of range with that wing. So it's kind of similar to larger foils as long as you have efficient technique. And that's another thing that I really like about smaller foils is they don't leave room for you to not be efficient. So it forces you to get better at your pumping technique. Found this really carries over to parrowing and sup downwind because you need to be good at pumping with your legs. Otherwise, you're just not really going to get onto foil. So it's another added benefit of small foils. So not only are you going to use bigger wings, but you're going to stay on those wings longer. I personally use a 5.5 meter up until 20 knots. I hold onto that wing from that, gusting 12 knot, 10 knot sort of day up until 20 knots. And I like that big wing range. And I'm able to use it in that big wind range because of a harness line setup. So I use the forward whip impact vest. It's got like a chest hook. It's a really good setup. And then you can use a really short harness line, hook in and absolutely fire upwind. And you can hold onto that wing longer than you would if you didn't have a harness. So I think another, not prerequisite or requirement, but another recommendation of mine would be to use a harness to help you unlock the small foils, big wing club. And as I've already touched on, you will be forced to get better at your pumping skills and specifically the coordination between your leg pumping and your wing pumping. If you can't pump your legs, then it's gonna eat away at the lower end of using a small foil. So you might not be able to get on foil when it's 12 to 15 knots with a 500 centimeter square foil, 600 centimeter square foil, unless you can pump your legs. So you sort of start to fall into that only using small foils in windier conditions. But I challenge you to try and learn how to get better at pumping because the types of sessions you can unlock by putting in the effort to learn this skill is incredible. Some of my favorite sessions are when you get on foil in 12 knots and the breeze fades away a bit, and then you're playing this puzzle of linking gusts and staying on foil and being accurate and getting into this sort of flow state of not thinking about falling off foil, but knowing in the back of your mind that if you do fall, you're probably not going to get back up. So it's this fun little cat and mouse sort of game of staying on foil. And that leads nicely into the next point of small foils, and that is how to stay on foil. Straight line skills are pretty easy once you get going. Once you've pumped onto foil, for the most part, if the wind's consistent, happy days, you're going to be going fast. What a small foil will teach you to do is to stay sheeted, and that's where it becomes really compatible with the harness line setup, because you're hooked in. It's going to have a baseline set of power that's more than if you're just holding onto it with your hands, because, you know, as your hands get tired, your backhand sort of fades away because it can only hold so much pressure, whereas a harness is hooked in, it's going, plenty of power there, and it's really driving that foil nice and fast. What you might find with a small foil is if you're in sort of an inconsistent breeze or lighter breeze, you'll have to add a little bit of a pump here and there to keep going, whether that's an extra wing pump, an extra leg pump, or a coordination between both. And it's these extra little movements that actually make you a bit better as a foiler, because in any given session on any given day, you're doing a lot more pumping than someone with larger gear but with a smaller wing would be doing. So it's that accumulation of that skill that you'll get better in a sneaky way that you didn't even realize. So that is something to remember when you test out a small foil, is just pump it a bit more, you know, put a little bit of extra effort into it. You'll find that maybe it feels like hard work in the first couple of sessions with it, but then it becomes second nature and you actually gain a bit of fitness from it too. So there's an upside if you look for the upside. The other side of staying on foil is the maneuvers. Small foils will really reward you for putting in the work. You'll be able to do some really tight turns, some really fast turns, and have a whole bunch of fun, even in flat water. But there's a few things to keep in mind in order to be able to do these. The biggest thing with small foils, and to be honest, any sort of foil, is speed is your friend. The faster you are going, the more stable, to an extent, you know, at the very, very top end. But you know, the more you can push your speed and stay comfortable, the more chance you have at getting through tacks, at getting through jibes, because your stall speed's down here. Wherever you set this entry speed to the jibe is how much of a window you have before you stall and crash. If you set this up nice and high over here, then you can carve through a tack or carve through a jibe and have plenty of time. So tacks and jibes on small foils look like building lots of speed before you enter, carving through, depending on the aspect ratio. If it's a smaller aspect ratio, you're going to be turning nice and tight. If it's a larger aspect ratio, then you'll be pushing plenty of glide, and it might even be similar to your larger foils that are actually a similar span. And then on the exit, you're actually going to need to learn, for most cases, how to pump your legs and how to get power in the wing nice and early. This will be super crucial when you're first learning how to use a small foil. The earlier you can get power on, the faster you can start pumping your legs, the more chance you'll have at succeeding and not stalling out during your tack or your jibe. And then as you learn that foil, you'll get better and better at pushing closer and closer to that stall speed without stalling. You'll have muscle memory to know exactly when it's going to crash out of the sky, and you'll be able to push the limits of how slow you can enter a tack or how slow you can exit as well. I also wanted to touch on the pros and cons, and this may be a little bit biased, so take it with a grain of salt. I've kind of touched on all of these already, so this is a bit of a summary, but the pros are it's in general more maneuverable. In general, they are faster, and as I mentioned, they're really fun in most conditions. They're fun in big bumps, they're fun in flat water, and if you can make them work in light wind, they feel incredible and ridiculous. And obviously when it's windier, way more fun than if you're on a larger foil. The cons that I see is you're going faster, so you're probably going to have bigger crashes, which for some people might be a downside. For others, it's kind of part of the thrill of wing foiling. Same thing again for this one. It could be a pro or a con depending how you look at it, and you're just going to have to work harder with a smaller foil. You need to put energy into it to get energy out of it. You don't have the same level of forgiveness as you do with a larger foil. And then the last thing is kind of the stall speed position. So this may vary depending on if it's a downwind style foil or if it's, you know, your standard wing style foil or even maybe a kite foil. The stall speed will dictate what sort of bumps you have access to, and also your ability to carve and, you know, do turns to stay on whatever style of bump you have available at your spot, at your local spot or where you are. A smaller foil might be a little bit incompatible with the bumps that you see most often, and that may take away a bit of the fun of the surf style. but you'll gain it back in that free ride, fast hacks, fast jibes, carving 360s, those style of maneuvers. As all things, there's trade-offs, but I'm still a massive fan of the small foils and big wing club. And if you like this video, I think you'll like these ones, so go check them out.